All right. Hello and welcome to another Medtech webinar. My name is Nicole Owens. I'm the Director of Marketing Communications for Medtech. Today, we have an awesome webinar brought to us by Viva Medtech, Driving Speed with Digital Clinical Transformation. Before we jump into the conversation today, I do just have a couple housekeeping notes to share. This webinar is being recorded, so anyone who registered for it will receive it after the fact, along with any slides that are referenced today. And we are going to have ample time for Q&A. So please make sure to feed in your questions in the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen, and we will make sure to take those. All right, without further ado, I am pleased to turn over the conversation to John Accampato. He is the Director of Clinical Strategy at Viva Medtech, and he's going to be leading the conversation today. John.
Thanks, Nicole. Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining the webinar, and thank you to Medtech. I look forward to a very engaging discussion today with Jason and Nikki, who I'll introduce in a second, as well as with you, our audience, in the form of Q&A towards the end of the session, as Nicole just mentioned. Before we jump right into it, I just wanted to have a few slides to help set the stage. As soon as I can find the slides. Share screen. You'd think after a few years of using Zoom, this would be automatic. But still we go. Before I jump into it, I want to invite everyone on the call to participate in the first Medtech Clinical Benchmark Survey. We want to gather the perspectives of the Medtech industry on current challenges that you're facing and how you're conducting clinical trials and how we can assess your future needs and opportunities to enable digital transformation to run those digital trials. There's a QR code still right here on the screen. And then after this webinar, we'll also send out a link out to everyone that has attended or registered for the webinar. So speaking about digital transformation, decentralized clinical models, electronic informed consent, electronic clinical outcome assessments, and other clinical technologies are becoming much more accepted and encouraged by the FDA. More medtech companies are making the shift to digital approaches. And for this webinar, we're going to have a really robust discussion with how Terumo is making that shift, as well as the approaches and best practices that they've implemented along the way. As Nicole mentioned, I'm John Accampato, the moderator for this webinar, and I'm the Director of Clinical Strategy for Viva Medtech. I've spent more than 17 years in the life sciences industry, working in clinical data management, programming, clinical operations, and software development. As a former Viva customer myself, I've always been amazed at Viva's dedication to the product that its customers use, as well as the community that it brings together. Joining me today from Terumo is Jason Parcell. He leads clinical data management, strategic and operational activities at Terumo Medical Corporation, one of the world's leading manufacturers of medical devices and supplies. Terumo and Viva recently partnered to complete a global implementation of Viva eTMF and CTMS. Jason also brings 17 years of experience working in clinical data management, both in pharmaceutical and medical devices, with a background in industrial psychology. He is quality-driven and leverages his experience and passion utilizing diverse strategic approaches, processes, and technologies to identify and implement business solutions supporting the quality and integrity of clinical data and data management activities. Also joining us is Nikki Feist. Nikki is a principal business consultant for Viva Medtech Business Consulting, and she brings over 20 years of experience leading cross-functional strategies in the medical device industry as both an industry leader and consultant. Her focus has been on clinical research, strategy, and operations. With demonstrated success leading complex initiatives, she specializes currently in process harmonization and improvement, change management, operating model design, and go-to-market strategies. More specifically, she has expertise in clinical trial strategy and clinical operations, digital transformation, and optimization. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen, and then I will ask Jason and Nikki to go off mute and join me.
Okay. Thank you, John.
Great. How you guys doing today?
Pretty good. A little chilly.
A little chilly, yeah. I am coming from Oakland or Alameda right now, and it is a lot colder than San Diego. So I can't imagine it can be, well, I can imagine it could be colder, but hopefully not too much colder. So, all right. Let's go ahead and kick it off. Maybe the first question to you, Jason. To help set the stage, could you give the audience an overview of Terumo's previous platforms, highlighting any inefficiencies with those various systems? And Nikki, feel free to chime in based on your experience as well.
Yeah, so Terumo came from a very heavily outsourced model. So I was brought into Terumo Medical a year ago, actually, to start that internalization process with data management services. A little bit earlier, we had started the same with our operational model. So we were really working with various CRO partners and leveraging the various systems that those partners used. So we really didn't have a lot of internal systems for CTMS, eTMF, and those critical operational systems that you need to run clinical trials. So with that came a lot of manual tracking. So I think a lot of us have been through the situation where, you know, you outsource and you start getting pieces of information and you start manually tracking that information, typically in Excel, which everyone knows and loves. But that also lends itself to a high potential for error, right? So you're taking something from one source and manually entering it into another source, and really increasing the opportunity for error there. So the other aspect that we had, you know, we didn't have a lot of insight or visibility to the day-to-day activities when you're outsourcing a number of clinical trials, especially when you're leveraging different vendors for those trials. You know, just not having the insight into the day-to-day activities and the systems and the functionalities of how everything was running. Kind of led us to a lack of audit trail on documents too. So when you're getting into eTMF and other documentation, you're trying to track things manually. In documents like Excel, they don't have an audit trail associated with it. So you kind of lose that audit history of who edited what, who had done what in the document, especially if, you know, an error occurs or something like that. It's hard to figure out when that happened and how to, you know, course correct. So as you can imagine, with all of that and our different partners, different vendors, manual tracking, all of our systems were disconnected, right? So we didn't have that eTMF to CTMS connection or EDC to CTMS connection either. So really kind of disconnected systems coming into, you know, from a vendor to the sponsor into manual tracking, you know, no set filing structure outside of our sponsor files at Terumo. So really just a whole number of issues in my mind and inefficiencies that you see when you look at that model compared to where we're trying to go now.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, you and I have been in very similar shoes. I can empathize with you. A lot of different disconnected systems in my previous life before I joined Viva, definitely. So yeah, I can definitely align with what you're saying right now. Nikki, anything to add on your end?
No, I think it's just kind of echoing that the manual process. I remember, you know, being on the industry side and the sponsor side of having maybe 10 different worksheets or spreadsheets that we were working from and tracking various aspects of a clinical study. And just how manual that process was, how time consuming it was. And then also the lack of visibility as the leader in the organization as well, when you have all these manual spreadsheets, which are not harmonized between the different clinical studies as well, just how difficult that is to have visibility to the overall clinical operations.
Yeah. Jason, if you could go into a little bit about what's the current vision for Terumo now? Like what is driving that clinical digital transformation? I'm sure a lot of us in the industry are extremely familiar by this at this point now with EU MDR. Were there other specific regulatory aspects that you were hoping to address with this change to really help drive your organization forward?
Yeah, great question. So really that driver was driven by a concept from our corporate division of one Terumo. So really kind of pushing this one Terumo vision. So to take a step back from that, you know, we had a number of entities or divisions running our clinical operations and operating kind of separately. So really kind of looking to, how are we going to digitalize and bring all of that together? So the process started back in 2018, where it was a nice to have a digital platform. And it really became a must to have with COVID, right? The whole landscape changed of how we operate. You couldn't walk across the office and have somebody hand sign or wet ink sign something anymore. We're all working remotely now. So really kind of push the digitalization there. And with that, we really wanted to improve our clinical trial operations and efficiencies, giving us that increased level of visibility, oversight, better control over, operations and documents. And really, John, to your point, the ease of meeting global regulatory requirements. So we're a large global medtech organization, and we get into different regulatory authorities like EU MDR, FDA, PMDA, Health Canada. You have a number of different bodies that you're dealing with, and really wanting to find a centralized, digitalized solution that was able to support all of those different regulatory requirements, along with making our operational processes and the way that we're functioning a lot more efficient.
Yeah, really, really great points. Could you go into a little bit of detail? I'm going to just pull on one thread that you mentioned. With Terumo being a global organization and a large entity, how many current business units do you guys have, or divisions do you guys currently have within that larger group?
Yeah, so there's a large number of business units or entities within that, but there's really 6 that run the clinical operations or clinical trials. So those 6 entities are all, kind of being brought together by having a centralized system like Viva come in and really kind of push everything to leverage a platform rather than functioning, disparately and kind of decentralized. We've brought that model back in to centralize, where our eTMF and CTMF are functioning out of, and that we're using that system consistently.
Yeah. Nikki, anything to add about, some of the similarities that you've seen across the industry about the approach that Terumo is planning to take?
Yeah, I think, we are seeing the same themes, drive medtech companies to launch into the, clinical and digital transformation to really meet the demands of the market, right? And I think traditionally medtech is, very far behind pharma, right, in several years, and really embracing and adopting new technology. And I feel like as the regulatory environment evolves, there's such a need for companies to transform the way they work, to become, more agile, more compliant. And like Terumo, I think several global companies are recognizing the value of a centralized clinical operations team, very much to drive the harmonized processes to create kind of, as Jason was saying, more streamlined, efficient, and transparent ways of working, both internally, but also with your external, clinical stakeholders, right?
Yeah.
And so I think, Terumo, in working with them and TMC, I think really understood that in order to be more proactive and future forward, they needed to find a way to re-engineer their study activities and the way they work. So I think while this effort, Jason, has been very time consuming for you guys. Like you said, you started in 2018. But really allowing you guys to move from an outdated manual process to really capturing study management data that can be predictive in nature. And I think by automating some of these processes, you guys were very successful in removing some of the redundant efforts. You're reducing your failure points, you're enabling organizational transparency into how you're conducting your trials, your site and study data, your subject management, right? And I just feel that, as as you continue to grow and utilize the system, it will become even more powerful as you learn kind of from the past studies and then plan your future ones.
Yeah, Jason, I want to pull out something that Nikki just mentioned. With the medtech industry being a few years behind, it seems like from the larger life sciences industry as a whole. Do you have any thoughts there about why that could be? Is it perhaps due to the lack of specific regulations about formatting of data? I know, coming from pharma as well, we had very specific rules about CDISC, SDTM. Any thoughts there? I just picked up on what Nikki mentioned. I thought that's incredibly poignant about where we are within the medtech industry.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's interesting, right? We keep hearing about some of these regulations coming into med device. Especially CDISC is a big one, right? I've been hearing about it for years. CDISC is coming, but it's not required, to your point. So I think when you look at it, the med device industry maybe not being as large or as focused as pharma was focused on previously has kind of held it back a little bit. But I think what's nice now is there's a big boom in companies like Veeva pushing for medtech, right? Pushing for med device. And, us being able to, maybe if we're not required to do something like CDISC or DIA, right? Now we can come into alignment with those and actually leverage the benefits of it. Like getting our regulatory submissions in and reviewed quicker, because we're now following formats that the regulatory bodies are familiar with by dealing with pharma.
Yeah.
It's been interesting, right, with the industry, but I really feel like it's starting to push now. So there's a huge change in the med device industry coming that's really been, I think, coming on slowly over the past couple of years, but now I think is almost in full throttle at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just the idea that, standardization is always fantastic, right? And I think a lot of us on the call will hopefully agree with that. But with medtech, medical device diagnostics specifically, it's, at least for me, coming over from pharma a few years ago, it's become abundantly clear that medtech, it's not that everything is different. Things are specialized, right? And we have to be able to adjust as an industry to that. Make sure that we're, the proverbial agile. We want to be that. We want to reach that mythical inspection readiness milestone at any given time. But at the same time, it's going to be our responsibility as an industry as a whole to be able to try to get to that point together, hopefully.
Yeah, and I think, John, touching on that, the specialized word, right? It really is very specialized. When you think about the products and what these med devices are and the different things that they do, it really is specialized treatment, that kind of separates us, and I think has kind of driven that lag in behind too, of technology and digitalization, because it's how do you stay on top of that? How do you meet the requirements of that in a digitalized way? But it's nice to see that, that industry is changing so rapidly. I mean, if you think about our phones, right, how rapidly our phones change. If I look at these systems now, I'll mention, Veeva, right? You guys update consistently, right? And those updates are made based on feedback and efficiencies and things that you're seeing. Previous technologies just didn't update like that. It took years. So now we're seeing this rapid change and development, and it's a really great time to be a part of it.
Yeah, great. Another question for you, Jason. If you could go into some of the critical things that Terumo was looking for specifically as part of your decision process when you were going through and that one Terumo vision, what was, aside from the regulatory aspects that were driving it, what were you looking for in that digital platform?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, the biggest one is that the regulatory requirements, okay. But outside of that, we really needed a global digitalized system that could support multiple business units, multiple divisions that work in slightly different capacities and have different business needs, but be able to kind of leverage that centralized global system. And Vivo was able to offer that with us and work with us and customize things a little bit here and there so that we can function in that way. I think another big piece of that decision-making process was the level of support, the partnership, right? So it's not just, here's the system and go, and you're on your own. There's really a lot of partnership and consistent meetings and communication that, kind of set things apart for us in our needs. Thinking about, I know Terumo is not the only company that functions the way that we do, but how do we make that work, right, with a centralized system? And Vivo was really there every step of the way, from implementation support, business consulting. So the amount of work that we did with Nikki and her team on the consulting side to really kind of help drive that partnership and support. And I know, Nikki, we can probably dive into that level of support as well, but really just always coming and being able to discuss a question and find a solution that fits our business need was one of the biggest drivers. Even in those early conversations when we were evaluating systems, it really kind of set Viva apart from other areas that we were looking at.
Thanks, Jason. Great. Nikki, would you want to add anything to that last exchange?
Yeah, I think it was the process that we went through and really trying to understand exactly where your organization was at TMC, right? And how we could come in and consulting and provide value beyond the technology, right? We have our internal Viva colleagues that support that level, but how could we help you be business ready? How could we stand up your team for user adoption to embrace that change? And so, I think that the change management aspect of standing your team up was very critical. And, understanding kind of exactly where your needs were. And as we got into the engagement, right, we recognized too that, hey, we thought this would be something that you guys would need. We quickly moved and pivoted around in the engagement to make sure we met the needs of where your team was at that point, to really adopt and implement Vault Clinical at TMC in the division.
Okay. Jason, when any organization, and this is maybe not purposefully a loaded question, but when any organization undergoes a really big, potentially multi-year change, implementing systems is really one thing, but you're also going to have to transition your respective teams. If you can give some insight, what are your recommendations for change management and training, for example? Because, software, that for some folks, that's the easy part, right? Someone will come and implement it. But change ultimately is going to be a bigger challenge. If you can give some insight there, please.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, where software is the easy part, right? You have your software, you make that installation. The implementation part, yes, can be a challenge, and the configuration, but really, to your point, that the change in the culture, the change in the people, the process, that's really the challenge that comes with taking on something like this. And Nikki, you had touched on it a little bit too, kind of partnering with the business consulting group for us was a really big help and drive to really look at our processes, because coming from outsourcing, the majority of our process was focused on how do we work with an outsourced partner. Now we're insourcing, and we need to kind of turn that process around and think about, how do we write this to fit what we're going to be doing in the system? And the approach that we had taken was to bring in business consulting prior to TMC implementing the system. So the system was implemented in waves at Terumo. So we had 3 waves starting in Europe. The second wave came into United States, and the third wave focused on Japan. So being part of that second wave, we kind of took the opportunity to leverage a partnership and really think about how we want to use this system before we're actually in there, functioning in a daily basis. And I really think that helped set the cornerstone of how we were going to operate and move forward. We were lucky enough to kind of have a group of individuals at TMC that was really excited about bringing these systems in, which is a unique situation when you think about change, right? Because usually change, everybody hears that word and it's, oh, what are we doing now? I need to relearn everything we've done. We kind of had that unique instance where things were being outsourced for the majority, and we have this team that's excited about this change, excited about these systems coming in, and we kind of got to build it from scratch. So what we were able to do by working early on in the process is create network of change, and really leverage the knowledge and expertise from Nikki and hey, what is the industry doing compared to what we're thinking about, and how is that gonna come together so we can figure out how things can work. But to your point, I think that change is the hardest part. We've implemented the system, we're actively using the system, and change is still a big part of what's going on in a daily basis. When we stop and look at, hey, we're doing things this way, let's look at it again. And now that we're actively using it and make sure. So really, I think to your point, it really is the biggest challenge and hurdle to work through. But I think realizing that, you have to come together and work together through it and push through that change was something our team was able to come together and focus on.
Yeah, great. Nikki, anything to add on your end about, again, some of the best practices? Obviously, you and your group may have done with Jason and team, but what else are you seeing within the industry as far as like that change management approach, training? Sometimes these implementations could be very quick, as quickly as 4 weeks, could be a few months. And then obviously the organizational change is something that's going to happen on a daily basis for a few months to come after everything's implemented.
Yeah, I think a big thing is, let's not underestimate the value of change management, right? And change strategy. And I really think, and as Terumo did in TMC and Jason and his team, you think about change very holistically, right? So again, introducing the technology is just a piece of that puzzle, a piece of that full equation. And so, we take an approach of saying, okay, change management, change strategy is about addressing the people, right? Your team, your end users, your clinical ops team, as well as other stakeholders, your process, your technology, and the tools that you provide the team and your end users with. And so, TMC really recognized this early on, as Jason said, as they considered their division unit and their business readiness plan for implementing Vault Clinical at TMC. And Jason and his team really purposefully built a business strategy to introduce the technology, as well as all the new ways of working. Going from an outsourced model to internal is a very different way of working. And so really looking at kind of that re-engineering process, you take a holistic approach to change management. And to kind of hit upon what the consulting team supported in how we supported TMC, really our focus of the consulting engagement was to establish the right framework for the team, right? From the very beginning. So their team had the foundation to manage. They have the foundation to sustain and to continually improve on their own. So really, we partnered with the team to set very clear direction, expectations, drive accountability, right? There's that accountability piece that needs to be taken into account when you're embracing a new model of working, retiring old ways, right? So setting that accountability. And then we really set that end-to-end support model and really address the end user needs at every part of the journey. So.
Great. I picked up on something both of you said. So, and you can keep me honest here. Today's systems, it sounds like we're not designing them to actually try to tackle the same issues that we faced, in the late 90s, early 2000s, when we were moving away from paper into EDC for the first time, actually starting to use these more electronic systems. It sounds like the digitization, as folks are starting to understand it, is a bit more of a paradigm shift in terms of how folks are working, less so, that shift from paper to EDC or electronic systems. Is that something you'd agree with? Do you have any commentary about that? Because I find it very fascinating that, you guys are talking about, when you're talking about change management, it's not just, again, not just the systems, but definitely you're changing potentially people's behaviors that have been set for probably the past 20 years.
It's a big shift. When you think about it, and it's a lot to take on. I think we touched on it before too, with the systems consistently updating, right? That target's always moving a little bit, and sometimes you're ready for that, and other times you're not. So you're kind of chasing that target, or you're pushing. Hey, in the next change, we really need this. So you're kind of on both ends of it, but it's actually really nice. Having that push and that consistent update and changing it just keeps you on top of what's going on in the industry, on top of the technology. I can't walk around, with the system that we had 20 years ago, because it just doesn't meet the needs of the landscape anymore. And that landscape is constantly changing. So the technology is changing, right with it, and a lot faster, compared to what we've seen, John, to your point, in the 90s and 2000s, all of that time. I think a lot of us were probably still working in paper and web fax and all these different things. Like, think how much change has occurred, in the 2000s, in 20 years. That change has been phenomenal. Step back to 3 years ago, the changes is insane, right? How much it is coming and how much the industry is moving. So it's really good. So you really have to keep your focus on moving forward. What can I do today? What do I need to do tomorrow? And where are our business needs going? And how do we meet those with where the industry is going? So it's been really interesting, to say the least.
Yeah. Nikki, anything to add on your end about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we all have to remember, when you take this leap into, digital transformation, it's about the journey, right? It's about the ongoing process of optimizing how you're using the system. Doing periodic health checks or maturity modeling assessments, right? And at certain business milestones, we're able to really, okay, are we using the system the way it is designed to be used? Are we using the system the way it is intended to be used? Where you're getting the most value out of your investment in the digital platform, right? And so I think that is key. And Jason, part of what we did with the TMC team is really set that foundation through a governance structure where you have roles and responsibilities too, of saying, okay, you're continually lessons learned, you're optimizing, you're doing best practices, you're continually improving as you're in the system and you become mature. Then you do another assessment. Okay, where else can we go with this? How can we best optimize what we're doing? And I think having that foundation, that structure from the beginning of embracing digital, technology as you go through, and just making sure that you are continually optimizing your processes within the application, but also outside.
Hey, Jason, let's start to pivot now, thinking about the future. Like, what's next for Terumo? What else is your group, maybe not just Terumo Medical, but Terumo as a whole? What else are you guys looking for to complete that transformation? And to Nikki's point, how to maximize value, to the most?
Yeah, I think part of it is really pushing on that one Terumo vision, right? That global network we talked about. And how do we do that? So we need to expand and build upon our eTMF and CTMF foundation that we have now. So we set that foundation, and now we need to build out from that. What is our house going to look like, essentially? So looking at, other areas that the platform actually allows, getting into, I know there's been a lot of talk about payments, eConsent, training. These are all things that, we look at now the way we're operating, and it kind of sparks, you talk about it in a meeting and it sparks the interest of the team globally. Hey, that's an issue for us in, this location. Well, hey, it's an issue for us here too. So how do we, leverage these systems, and how do we digitalize and get on top of that to increase our quality, decrease the error rate, and really kind of stay on top of that and drive, where we're going. I think being uncomfortable, right? So being comfortable with being uncomfortable is a big part of where we want to go in the future, right? Because we can't sit where we're at today and live there forever like we did 20 years ago, right? We need to think about that vision and drive towards it, and creating that one Terumo global network around centralized systems to really drive those efficiencies.
Yeah, but and just to pick up on what you said, it definitely starts with having a foundation, right? Knowing where all your regulatory documents are, knowing how you're going to monitor, making sure everything is in one system. The very elusive single source of truth that we've been hunting for the past 20 plus years. If we can get to that, it sounds like then you can start to stack more components onto that foundation. Like you said, training, how to handle site payments better, how to handle, engaging your patients better, eConsent, ePro, that type of stuff. Yeah. Okay. All right. So we're at about 1:38 Eastern time. As we start to get ready for some Q&A, one last question for me for the both of you. Nikki, if you can go first, and then we'll hopefully close it with Jason. With the industry changing and being more open to ePro, eCOA, et cetera, how do you see that industry shift progressing, especially within clinical trials in Medtech? Nikki, if you could first.
Sure. I mean, I think it's really driving towards value realization, value optimization. It always goes back to how can we better bring products to the market faster, to our physicians, to our patients. And so as you think about how the industry is evolving, that's really the end goal for everyone, right? And so embracing these new technologies and ways of working within clinical ops, if we set the foundation to do that as an industry, I think we will be able to achieve that end goal of bringing product to the market quicker. And just thinking out of the box, right, of different ways. We have some of the technology available to us. Now let's embrace that and see how we could, evolve the way that we think about doing clinical trials in Medtech. And I think that's really the trend of the industry that we see moving forward. Also with that is using, data-driven decisions on how you're executing your trials and how you're managing your patients, or doing clinical study design, how you're going about site selection, things like that, where you're using the data through the technology to drive those decisions in clinical trial execution.
Great. Yeah, great points, Nikki. Jason?
Yeah, I completely agree about, using that data, right, to drive decision making and drive the way that you're pushing and growing. I think, we need to trust the technology, right? And I think that's one of the biggest hurdles that we have, is kind of trusting the technology. But if you look at it, think about all the data, Nikki, to your point, that we're getting, right? Everything is coming in. It's all at it's all at our fingertips. We just need to figure out how to look at it and use it to make those important decisions and find those efficiencies. And I think the more that we do that, the technology is really just going to springboard, and the industry is going to springboard off of that and continue to grow and develop. For us, getting data, how do we get better, high quality data faster, right? How do we get our trials completed quicker with, less queries, less, filing issues, less, manually tracking, like getting away from all of that, and how do we drive that, technology and the digital platform to leverage it and keep us honest, but allow us to run lean and efficient and get those submissions in to get those devices to market to help patients.
Yeah, and to your point before, Jason, how you opened it, the idea, the previous question, being comfortable with being uncomfortable, right? Change for a lot of folks is definitely not the easiest aspect of anything, right? A lot of folks going from rotary phone to a cell phone, right? My first Nokia, I was like, oh wow, this is fantastic. And then now we have iPhones. I feel like we're at that, we're going from the Nokia to the iPhone stage in the medtech industry, and making sure that we can make that shift together, and we're able to help each other out and learn from, what people have done and start to leverage that understanding. It's going to be incredibly beneficial for everyone, especially with what happened over the past couple of years with COVID. The paradigm shift was there, and COVID was really an accelerator for a large portion of the industry. So, well, thank you guys for your time. If there are any questions in Q&A, I'm going to take a look now, and then obviously feel free to drop some in the chat as well. But I do have one here, it looks like. Jason, over to you first. So in terms of Q&A, you mentioned earlier that Terumo is moving from a heavily outsourced model to one where the various clinical systems are going to be managed internally. In your opinion, I'm trying to paraphrase this a bit, when would it be ideal for an outsourced model for clinical ops or data management? And how do you think that affects the speed of a clinical trial?
Yeah, great question. Tough one, but great question. So I think, you need to look at your capabilities and know what you can handle internally versus what you need to outsource. When I think of the industry right now, we may insource as much as possible, but there's always going to be some need for outsourcing. So you need to know what your capabilities are, and figure out, where that expertise is and where you may need to outsource, or maybe you need to outsource a whole study because you don't have the resourcing capabilities. Well, how do you know that, right? So now when you look at these systems and the technology that we have, I can find that information out a lot quicker and make quicker decisions. So, you gotta kind of check your gut feeling against the data, right? When I look at, timelines and things come in and, ooh, that's going to be a tough one. Now I can look at the data and say, hey, maybe in my mind, I thought it was going to be tough, but we can do this one, but we can't do the next one. So we need to start looking at partners now. So really kind of creating that total picture of your capabilities. Where does it kind of increase efficiency? Again, maybe in areas that, Terumo's insourcing a lot right now, right? We're trying to bring things in-house, but we don't have every function within the organization. So there's certain functions that we know we need to leverage vendors or outsource to a CRO. And that actually increases the efficiency for us because we're not trying to build infrastructure around a whole new department to run a certain clinical trial. We can leverage a partner to say, hey, we have this piece and I need to outsource this aspect of it so that we can keep things moving. I think the other part is trying to, find preferred vendors, right? Vendors that you're comfortable with, that you work with consistently, where hey, I can hand this one off. I know it's in good hands, and I can turn around and focus on this, this aspect or these other projects that are inside for us.
Absolutely. Yeah. I do see one of the attendees raising their hand. I don't think that we have the ability to take live questions like verbally, but Richard Meiklejohn, if you're able to put your question into the Q&A or into the chat, I'd be happy to read it out and hopefully we can answer it. I did see one hand raised if you're still on the call, Richard. Oh, thank you, Nicole, for saying we can't. Great. So we'll wait for that question, Richard. I do have one here. So we spoke a little bit about consulting. I guess, Nikki, this is going to be over to you because it's related to consulting. What role do you think consulting can play to make sure the industry is moving together in that collaborative fashion? More often than not, it definitely sounds like, and again, paraphrasing here, competitors are in the industry. What do you think consulting can do so that we all can conduct trials a little bit more efficiently and effectively?
Yeah, I think really what we can do is partner with the Medtech customers to promote kind of, again, we keep drilling this in, but a little bit more of that future forward thinking, right? And transforming how we think about trials. And it's about bringing value, and driving and supporting our customers and organizations in the industry as a whole to really embrace, the digital transformation, using the technology as it is designed to do, but also creating innovative ways of working inside applications, but also outside, right? And I think, just creating this community is a big thing. We have so much knowledge in the industry, but how can we bring that together to really drive innovative different processes and working with organizations and lessons learned, sharing best practices. So I think we can really, what we're trying to do here is really help the industry resolve kind of the recurring pain points in trial execution and guiding, using the guiding principles and making data-driven decisions.
Mm-hmm. Great. I don't see any other questions in the chat or in Q&A. Richard, I'm not sure if you did want to put a question in. If not, thanks everyone for attending this webinar. I will turn it back over to you, Nicole, for some closing remarks for us. And thank you very much to Jason and Nikki for coming along and telling your respective stories about business consulting, and then obviously what Terumo is doing to help drive your change management strategy and overall digitization effort inside Terumo Medical. Over to you, Nicole. Thanks to Mathematic, of course, for having us as part of this webinar.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, John. And I would just like to reiterate thank you to all of you, Nikki and Jason, John, for joining today, sharing your expertise. Thank you to Viva Medtech for sponsoring this webinar. We are only able to put on great educational content like this because of support from our members. So just keep that in mind moving forward. If it's something you would like to do as well, you can always go to massmedic.com under events and find out what we have coming up next. Thank you everybody for attending. Hope you have a wonderful day. Take care.